No one ever wanted me.
Lydia whispered in the darkness, her voice trembling like a dying candle. The cowboy Caleb turned, his gaze unwavering. I've been searching for you my whole life. This is the story of a woman with a bad reputation, ostracized by her town, who meets the only man who dares to stand by her side when the world turns its back on her. Watch until the end, like, and comment with the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has come. Now, let's begin from that fateful day. The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, sending up a cloud of dust that hung in the air like a shroud over Redwood Creek. Lydia Hale gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white beneath her worn cotton gloves. Through the smudged window, she could see the town, a collection of weathered buildings scattered along a main street that seemed to bleed directly into the surrounding wilderness. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late spring warmth. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her 19th fresh start, if she was being honest with herself. The driver climbed down with a grunt, his boots hitting the packed earth with a thud that seemed to echo in the strange stillness. Lydia waited, as she always did, for the other passengers to disembark first. There were only three, a merchant and his wife, and a young man who looked like he was heading to the mines with dreams of gold still bright in his eyes. They would learn soon enough that dreams died quickly in places like this. When the coach finally emptied, Lydia gathered her single carpet bag and stepped down carefully, mindful of her skirts. The fabric was faded but clean, mended in places with stitches so tiny they were nearly invisible. She had learned long ago that appearances mattered, especially when you had nothing else. The town seemed to hold its breath as she stood there, one hand shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. Redwood Creek wasn't much to look at. A general store with a false front that had seen better days. A saloon that was already doing brisk business despite the early hour. A bank, a boarding house, what looked like a modest church at the far end of town. And everywhere, men, miners, ranchers, drifters, all turning to look at the lone woman who had just arrived. Lydia had learned to read those looks. Some were curious. Some were hungry. None were particularly welcoming. She was about to ask the driver about the boarding house when a commotion erupted from the saloon. A man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated despite the sun still being high in the sky. His clothes were caked with dried mud, and his face was flushed red with either drink or anger, possibly both. "That's her!" he shouted, pointing directly at Lydia with a trembling finger. "That's the woman what stole from me in Silver Ridge." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Time seemed to slow as every eye on the street turned toward her. She felt her chest constrict, that familiar panic rising like bile in her throat. "Not again. Please, not again." "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've never been to Silver Ridge in my life." "Liar!" The drunk lurched forward, and several men moved with him, their expressions hardening. "You took my poke, had near $300 in gold dust." $300. The amount was absurd. Lydia had never held that much money in her entire life, but she could see the belief spreading through the crowd like wildfire. A strange woman arrives in town. An accusation is made. Why would anyone believe her over one of their own? She backed up instinctively, her carpet bag clutched to her chest like a shield. "I've never stolen anything from anyone. I just arrived on that coach. You can ask the driver." But the driver had already unhitched the team and was leading them toward the livery, pointedly not looking back at the scene unfolding in the street. Of course. Why would he involve himself in trouble that wasn't his? "Let's see what's in that bag," another man said, moving to flank the drunk miner. "If she's innocent, she won't mind showing us." Lydia's mind raced. The bag contained everything she owned. Her sewing kit, 2 changes of clothes, the small Bible her mother had given her before she died, and the handful of coins that represented her entire fortune. She couldn't let them paw through it, couldn't let them see how little she had. Somehow, poverty felt more shameful than the theft they were accusing her of. "The lady said she doesn't know you." The voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter, calm, deep, and carrying an authority that made several men pause mid-step. A man had emerged from what Lydia now noticed was a sheriff's office, though the sign was so faded she had missed it initially. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it had seen its share of trouble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, They were gray as a winter sky, and they were fixed on the drunk miner with an expression that suggested he had dealt with this particular problem before. "Sheriff Rowan," the miner said, though his bluster had diminished considerably. "This woman is someone you've never met before in your life, Tucker," the sheriff interrupted. "Because I happen to know you've never been to Silver Ridge. You've been working the same claim outside of town for the last 8 months without leaving except to drink away your earnings every Saturday night." Tucker's face reddened further, but whether from shame or anger, Lydia couldn't tell. "But I lost my poke to a card game 3 nights ago at Sally's table, where you always lose because you're too drunk to remember which cards you're holding." The sheriff's voice hadn't risen, but there was steel beneath the calm. "Now apologize to the lady for frightening her, then get yourself home and sleep it off." For a moment, Lydia thought the miner might argue, but the sheriff had moved his coat aside slightly, revealing the gun at his hip, and whatever fight Tucker had in him seemed to evaporate. He mumbled something that might have been an apology and stumbled away, supported by one of his friends. The crowd began to disperse, though Lydia could feel their eyes on her, hear the whispers starting. The damage was done. She was the woman accused of theft. In a town like this, the truth mattered less than the story. "Miss," the sheriff had approached her, his hat now in his hands. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set as if he spent most of his time clenching it. "I apologize for that welcome. Tucker's more mouth than sense on a good day, and this clearly isn't one of his good days." "Thank you for intervening," Lydia managed, though her hands were still shaking. "Though I'm not sure it will matter much. I've seen how these things go." Something flickered across his face, recognition perhaps, or understanding. "You're here for the seamstress position? The one Mrs. Chen advertised in the territorial paper?" Lydia nodded, surprised he knew. "I am, though I'm not sure Mrs. Chen will still want me after that." "Mrs. Chen doesn't put much stock in the opinions of drunks," the sheriff said. There might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth, but it was gone before Lydia could be sure. "Her shop is just down the street, above the general store. And Miss Hale, Lydia Hale." "Miss Hale." He settled his hat back on his head. "Might I suggest you find Mrs. Chen sooner rather than later, before the gossips get to her with their version of what just happened?" It was good advice, and Lydia knew it. She thanked him again and started down the street, acutely aware of the eyes following her, the conversations that stopped as she passed and resumed as soon as she was out of earshot. This was how it always went. Arrive in a new place with hope fragile as spun glass. Watch it shatter before you'd even unpacked. The only difference this time was how quickly it had happened. Mrs. Chen's shop was exactly where the sheriff had indicated, reached by an external staircase that creaked ominously under Lydia's weight. She knocked, half hoping no one would answer, that she could just keep moving to the next town, and the next, forever running from a past that seemed determined to follow her. "Come in, come in!" The voice was brisk, but not unkind, carrying a slight accent that spoke of origins far from this dusty mining town. Lydia opened the door to find a small, neat room filled with the tools of the trade. Bolts of fabric lined one wall, though the selection was modest. A sewing machine, a real one, a Singer, sat by the window where the light was best. And behind a cutting table stood a woman who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to see everything. "You're the girl from the advertisement," Mrs. Chen said. It wasn't a question. "Sit. Let me see your hands." Lydia set down her bag and extended her hands, palms up. Mrs. Chen studied them for a long moment, the calluses from years of needlework, the tiny scars that were the price of the trade, the neatness of her own mended gloves. "You know your business," Mrs. Chen said finally. "The advertisement said you had experience?" 6 years, Lydia replied. "I apprenticed with a dressmaker in Philadelphia, then worked in St. Louis, Denver, and Virginia City. I can do everything from basic mending to full dress construction. I'm familiar with the latest patterns from the East, though I understand that won't be as relevant here." "You'd be surprised," Mrs. Chen said, moving to her fabric collection. "Even here, women want to feel beautiful, want to remember they're not just surviving, but living. Can you do alterations? That's most of the work. Men's pants that need letting out or taking in, shirt repairs, that sort of thing." Of course. And you can work independently? I'm not here much. I have other business interests that take up my time. You'd be running the shop most days. This was better than Lydia had hoped. Her own space, away from prying eyes and constant judgment. That would be ideal. Mrs. Chen nodded as if Lydia had passed some invisible test. The advertisement mentioned room and board. There's space here, just a cot and a stove, but it's yours if you want it. Or there's Mrs. Grady's boarding house, if you prefer company. The memory of the scene in the street was still fresh. Here would be better, if you don't mind. I prefer privacy. I noticed you arrived with quite a commotion. Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp. Tucker's a fool, but he has friends. You should know what you're walking into. I've walked into worse, Lydia said quietly. Then, because honesty seemed safer than trying to hide, she added, I'm used to not being wanted. It won't interfere with my work. Something in Mrs. Chen's expression softened, though her voice remained brisk. Good, because I need someone who can work, not someone who'll spend half the day crying into the pincushion. You start tomorrow. Today, get yourself settled. There's a basin for washing, and I'll bring up some bread and cheese later. It was only after Mrs. Chen had left, her footsteps fading down the external stairs, that Lydia allowed herself to sink onto the narrow cot. The room was small, barely large enough for the bed, a small table, and a trunk for storage. But it had a door that locked from the inside, and a window that looked out over the mountains rather than the street below. She had learned not to unpack too thoroughly, not to settle too deeply into any one place. But she took out her sewing kit, the one constant in her life, and set it carefully on the table. Then she removed her mother's Bible, the leather cover worn smooth from years of handling, and placed it beside the bed. Tomorrow she would start working. She would prove that she was valuable, that she could contribute. She would keep her head down and her mouth shut, and maybe, just maybe, this town would let her stay long enough to save some money, to have something resembling a life. She didn't let herself hope for more than that. Hope was a luxury she had learned to live without. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Lydia heard the town coming to life below. Laughter from the saloon, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer working late, horses moving through the street. Somewhere, a woman was singing while she worked, her voice carrying through the evening air. Normal sounds, the sounds of a place where people belonged. Lydia pulled the thin curtain across the window and prepared for bed, though sleep was a long time coming. When it did, she dreamed of Philadelphia, of the life she'd had before everything fell apart. She dreamed of her mother's funeral, of the man who had promised her the world and then destroyed her reputation when she refused to be controlled. She dreamed of all the towns she'd fled from, all the fresh starts that had turned sour. And she woke, as she always did, determined to survive another day. The next morning, Mrs. Chen arrived early with a basket of work. Mrs. Patterson's dress needs letting out. She's with child but won't admit it yet, so be discreet. 3 pairs of men's trousers need repair, and young Lily from the boarding house tore her Sunday dress and is beside herself. Can you fix it so it doesn't show? Lydia took the basket and examined each item, her experienced fingers finding the weak seams, the worn fabric, the places where careful work could extend a garment's life by months or even years. This will take me most of the day. Should I bring them back to the customers when I'm finished? Lily will come by for hers this afternoon. Her mother's strict about her chores. The others can wait until tomorrow. And Miss Hale? Mrs. Chen paused at the door. Whatever you hear said about you in town, remember that talk is cheap and work is valuable. Show them what you can do, and the rest will take care of itself. It was perhaps the kindest thing anyone had said to Lydia in years, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears as she threaded her first needle of the day. The work was meditative, familiar. Her hands knew what to do without thought, leaving her mind free to wander. But she tried not to let it wander too far down dark paths. Instead, she focused on the present, the morning light streaming through the window, the slight breeze that carried the scent of pine from the mountains, the quiet satisfaction of a seam well sewn. Lily arrived around noon, a girl of perhaps 12 with braids the color of wheat and eyes that were both nervous and curious. She looked around the small shop with interest before her gaze settled on Lydia. "You're the new seamstress," she said. The one Tucker accused of being a thief. There it was. Lydia kept her expression neutral as she retrieved the carefully mended dress. I am, and I'm not a thief. I didn't think so, Lily said, surprising her. Tucker accuses someone of stealing from him every few months. Last time it was Mr. Henderson at the bank. Before that, it was the bartender at the saloon. Mama says he needs to stop drinking or someone's going to shoot him for his lies. From the mouths of babes. Lydia found herself almost smiling as she showed Lily the repair. I reinforced the whole seam while I was at it, so it should hold up better now. Try to be more careful around fence posts. Lily's eyes widened. How did you know it was a fence post? The wood splinters in the fabric, and the height of the tear suggests you were climbing something you probably shouldn't have been. A flush crept across Lily's cheeks, but she was grinning. You won't tell my mama? Your secret is safe with me. Lily paid with coins carefully counted from a small purse, then lingered by the door. You're staying, aren't you? In town, I mean. Mrs. Chen's last seamstress only lasted 3 weeks before she got married to a miner and moved away. I'm staying, Lydia said, though she couldn't quite bring herself to add, if the town lets me. After Lily left, the afternoon stretched quiet and peaceful. Lydia worked steadily, losing herself in the rhythm of the needle. But as the shadows began to lengthen, she heard footsteps on the external stairs. Heavy footsteps. A man's footsteps. Her hands stilled on the fabric. She was alone, in a room that was no longer quite so safe feeling. The door was locked, but the lock was flimsy. If someone wanted to... Miss Hale? The voice was familiar. The sheriff from yesterday. Mrs. Chen said you might need these supplies brought up. I have thread and some extra lamp oil. Lydia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and opened the door. Sheriff Rowan stood there, a box in his hands, looking slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen usually brings supplies herself, Lydia said carefully. She was occupied, asked if I'd mind. He held out the box, not moving to enter. I know you've no reason to trust a stranger, Miss Hale, especially after yesterday. But I mean you no harm. I'll just set this inside the door if that's acceptable. There was something in his manner, a straightforwardness, a respect for her caution, that made Lydia step back and allow him to place the box just inside the threshold. He didn't look around the room, didn't comment on the sparse furnishings or her meager belongings visible through the open trunk. Thank you, she said. He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Mrs. Chen speaks highly of your work already, says you have a gift for making old things look new again. It's just careful attention, Lydia demurred. Nothing special. Still, he paused, as if considering his next words. I wanted you to know that what happened yesterday, it won't happen again. Not while I'm sheriff. You have the same right to peace as anyone in this town. Lydia wanted to believe him, but she had heard similar promises before, had watched them dissolve like morning mist when the town decided she wasn't worth defending. That's kind of you to say, Sheriff. But we both know how these things work. I'm the outsider. He's one of yours. Tucker's a drunk and a fool, and everyone knows it, the sheriff said bluntly. You're a woman trying to earn an honest living. In my book, that counts for more. After he left, Lydia found herself thinking about his words as she returned to her sewing. In my book. As if his opinion was the only one that mattered, as if the judgment of one man could shield her from the judgment of an entire town. She wanted to scoff at the naivety of it, but instead she found herself hoping, just a little, that he might be right. Masim. The days began to blur together, falling into a pattern that was almost peaceful. Lydia worked from sunrise to sunset, her needle flying through fabric with practiced precision. The work came steadily, more than she had expected. Apparently Mrs. Chen's last seamstress had left quite a backlog, and word was spreading that the new woman was both skilled and fast. Mrs. Patterson came to collect her altered dress, her relief evident even though she said nothing about her changing figure. The 3 men whose trousers Lydia had repaired came by to pick them up, and one of them, a rancher named Mr. Sullivan, commissioned 2 new shirts, apologizing that his wife had passed the previous winter, and he'd never learned to sew. Take your time, he said gruffly, and make them sturdy. I'm not easy on clothes. Little by little, coin by coin, Lydia began to build something that felt almost like security. She kept her savings in a small cloth bag hidden in her mattress, counting the coins each night before she slept. It wasn't much yet, but it was hers, earned honestly, with work she could be proud of. But the town hadn't forgotten the scene in the street. Lydia could see it in the way conversations stopped when she passed, the way some women pulled their skirts aside slightly, as if even proximity to her might taint them. The way men looked at her with speculation in their eyes, as if a woman accused of theft might be guilty of other moral failings as well. She bore it silently, as she always had. What else was there to do? Mrs. Chen proved to be an unconventional employer. She appeared at odd hours, sometimes staying for days, sometimes disappearing for a week at a time. But she always paid promptly, and she seemed satisfied with Lydia's work. "You have good instincts," she said one afternoon, examining a dress Lydia had modified without being told. "You knew Mrs. Harrison would want the neckline lower, even though she didn't say so." "How?" "She kept touching her throat when she tried it on," Lydia explained, "and looking at herself sideways in the mirror. Women do that when they want to see more of something but are afraid to ask." Mrs. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You watch people." "I have to." Lydia kept her eyes on her stitching. "When you're not wanted, you learn to read the room quickly. Learn when to speak and when to stay silent. Learn when to leave before you're thrown out." "And you think you'll be thrown out of Redwood Creek?" "Eventually." Lydia tied off a thread and snipped it cleanly. "It's what always happens." She didn't elaborate and Mrs. Chen didn't ask, but something in the older woman's expression suggested she understood more than Lydia had said. 2 weeks after her arrival, the town held what they called a social, an evening gathering in the street with tables of food, music from a few fiddles and a banjo, and dancing as the sun set. Mrs. Chen insisted Lydia attend. "You can't hide forever," she said firmly, "and people need to see you as part of the community, not some ghost haunting the sewing shop." Lydia wanted to refuse, but Mrs. Chen had been kind to her, and she owed the woman at least an attempt at normalcy. So she put on her better dress, still worn, but clean and well-mended, and ventured down into the street as the evening shadows grew long. The social was already in full swing. Long tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes. Children ran between the adults, shrieking with laughter. The musicians had set up near the saloon, and several couples were already dancing in the cleared space that served as the town square. Lydia stood at the edge of it all, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the evening. She recognized some faces now. Lily and her mother, Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Patterson with her growing belly. But no one approached her. No one smiled or waved. She was present but not included, visible but unseen. She was about to retreat back to the safety of the shop when a figure materialized beside her. Sheriff Rowan, looking uncomfortable in what must have been his Sunday clothes, though it was only Thursday. "Miss Hale," he said, nodding politely. "Glad to see you decided to come." "Mrs. Chen insisted," Lydia replied, then winced at how ungracious that sounded. "I mean, I understand. These things can be overwhelming, especially when you're new." He paused, watching the dancers. "Especially when the welcome wasn't particularly warm." Lydia glanced at him, surprised by his directness. Most people pretended not to notice social discomfort, as if acknowledging it might be contagious. "You don't strike me as someone who enjoys these gatherings either, Sheriff." "Caleb," he said, "and you're right. I prefer quieter company. But Mrs. Patterson organized this, and she's the school teacher's sister, and the school teacher is courting my deputy, so—" He shrugged. "Politics." Despite herself, Lydia felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Complicated." "Always is." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the dancers. Then Caleb spoke again, his voice careful. "I notice you've been doing good work for folks. Sullivan says those shirts you made are the best he's ever owned. He's easy to please. He just wanted them to last through a season of hard wear. Still, people are noticing. Your skill, I mean." What he didn't say was what else people were noticing, the way she kept to herself, the way she flinched from loud noises, the way she never quite met anyone's eyes for too long, as if she was afraid of what she might see there. The music shifted to a slower tune, and more couples moved into the dancing space. Lydia felt Caleb shift beside her, as if he might be considering asking her to dance. The thought terrified her. Before he could speak, however, a commotion broke out near the food tables. Tucker, of course it was Tucker, had stumbled into Mrs. Patterson, nearly knocking her over. Several men rushed to help her, and in the chaos that followed, Lydia heard her own name being mentioned. Probably set him up to it. That woman from the stagecoach knew she was trouble. The accusations were irrational, absurd. She had been standing nowhere near Tucker, but rationality had nothing to do with it. She was the convenient target, the outsider, the one who could be blamed for disruptions to their peace. Lydia felt her carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. She needed to leave, to escape before the whispers became accusations, before this scene became another reason she'd have to flee in the night. "I should go," she murmured, already turning away. But Caleb moved with her, positioning himself between Lydia and the gathering crowd. "Miss Hale was standing next to me the entire time," he said clearly, his voice carrying. 20 feet from Tucker and the tables, anyone who suggests otherwise is mistaken." The whispers didn't stop entirely, but they faltered. Lydia felt the weight of the sheriff's authority being used on her behalf, and it was simultaneously humiliating and deeply moving. No one had stood up for her in so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I really should go. I don't belong here." She left before he could respond, before anyone could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. She climbed the stairs to her room above the shop, locked the door behind her, and stood in the darkness, her chest heaving with the effort of not breaking down completely. "Chang'ai tum wonem ka," she whispered to the empty room, the words falling from her lips in her mother's language. The Vietnamese phrases she rarely spoke aloud anymore, remnants of the heritage her mother had given her. No one had ever wanted her. Not really, not for herself. She had been wanted for her beauty once back in Philadelphia, wanted for the social status marriage to her would have brought. But when she'd proven to have a mind of her own, when she'd refused to be controlled and molded into someone else's ideal wife, that wanting had turned to something ugly. Her former fiancé had destroyed her reputation systematically, thoroughly, making sure she could never return to Philadelphia society. She had run, as she always ran, St. Louis, Denver, Virginia City. Each time she'd hoped the past would stay buried. Each time some incident, a drunk's accusation, a case of mistaken identity, simple bad luck, had forced her to move on. Now she was in Redwood Creek, and already the pattern was repeating. She could feel it like a noose tightening around her throat. Soon the whispers would become louder. Soon Mrs. Chen would decide that keeping her on wasn't worth the trouble. Soon she'd be packing that carpet bag again, moving to the next town, starting over with even less hope than before. She sank onto the narrow cot, her mother's Bible clutched in her hands. She didn't open it. She'd read it so many times she practically had it memorized. But the weight of it was comforting. It was a connection to a time when she'd been loved, when she'd belonged somewhere. "I'm so tired, Mama," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm so tired of running." But she knew that come morning she would get up. She would thread her needle and begin again. Because survival was what she did. It was all she knew how to do. Below, the sounds of the social continued, music and laughter, the sounds of community and belonging, sounds that would never quite be for her. Lydia pulled the thin blanket over herself and closed her eyes, willing sleep to come quickly. Tomorrow there would be work. Tomorrow she would prove her value again. Tomorrow she would survive. It was the only promise she could make herself, and she had learned long ago not to expect anything more. The morning after the social, Lydia woke with a heaviness in her chest that felt like stones piled on her ribs. She lay still for a long moment, listening to the town stirring below. The rumble of wagon wheels, the murmur of voices, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer starting his day. Normal sounds. Sounds of people who belonged. She forced herself up, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and dressed mechanically. Her reflection in the small mirror showed dark circles under her eyes and a tightness around her mouth that made her look older than her 24 years. She turned away quickly and reached for her sewing basket. Work. There was always work. Mrs. Chen arrived mid-morning with more than usual, her expression unreadable as she set 3 large bundles on the cutting table. Mrs. Harrison needs a dress for her daughter's wedding next month. Mr. Chen, my nephew, needs 2 suits. And the Dawson boys have all outgrown their church clothes again. Lydia examined each item, grateful for something to focus on besides the memory of last night's humiliation. This is quite a lot. Will you need help with— You can handle it, Mrs. Chen interrupted. I've seen what you can do in a day. Besides, I'll be away for most of the week. Some business in Sacramento that can't wait. The thought of being alone in the shop for an entire week should have been comforting. Instead, Lydia felt a flutter of anxiety. Without Mrs. Chen's presence, however intermittent, she would be even more vulnerable to the town's judgment. Mrs. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. Miss Hale, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me when I first came to this country. She said, the world will tell you who you are, but you don't have to listen. Do you understand? Lydia's hands stilled on the fabric. I think so. No, you don't. Not yet. Mrs. Chen's voice was firm, but not unkind. You walk around this town like you're apologizing for breathing, like you're waiting for permission to exist. But permission isn't something anyone can give you. You have to take it for yourself. The words struck something deep in Lydia's chest, but before she could respond, Mrs. Chen had already moved toward the door. I'll be back next week. Try not to let them chase you off while I'm gone. After she left, Lydia sat at the sewing machine for a long time, Mrs. Chen's words echoing in her mind. Permission to exist. When had she stopped giving herself that permission? When had she started believing that her worth was determined by whether others accepted her? She knew the answer. It had been 3 years ago in Philadelphia, when Richard Thornton had systematically destroyed everything she was. But she couldn't think about that now. She couldn't let those memories poison this moment. So she did what she always did. She pushed them down deep and focused on the work in front of her. The wedding dress for Mrs. Harrison's daughter proved to be a challenge. The girl was tall and slender, with shoulders that were broader than the current fashion accommodated. Lydia spent hours adjusting the pattern, adding delicate details to draw the eye away from the fit issues and toward the beauty of the work itself. Lace at the collar, tiny tucks at the waist, pearl buttons down the back that would catch the light. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear the footsteps on the stairs until someone knocked. She jumped, pricking her finger on the needle. A drop of blood welled up, and she quickly pressed it against her apron before going to the door. Caleb Rowan stood there, hat in hand, looking somehow both determined and uncomfortable. Miss Hale, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Sheriff, Lydia kept one hand on the door, ready to close it if necessary. Is something wrong? No, that is— He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I wanted to apologize for last night. The way people treated you wasn't right. You have nothing to apologize for. You defended me. And then I let you leave alone when I should have walked you back here. Made sure you were all right. His gray eyes were direct, honest. I've been sheriff here for 2 years, and I know how this town works. I should have done more. Lydia didn't know what to say to that. Apologies were rare in her experience, and genuine ones rarer still. It wasn't your responsibility, Sheriff. Maybe not, but I'd like it to be. He must have seen her expression change because he quickly added, That came out wrong. I mean, I'd like to be your friend, Miss Hale, if you'd allow it. This town can be hard on newcomers, especially women on their own. Seems like you could use someone in your corner. Why? The question came out more sharply than she'd intended. Why would you want that? You don't know me. You don't know anything about me. I know you work hard. I know you're honest, Mrs. Chen wouldn't have kept you otherwise. I know you're kind to young Lily and patient with Mrs. Patterson's fussing, and you fixed Mr. Sullivan's shirt so well he actually smiled, which I didn't think was possible. Caleb shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with his own earnestness. I also know what it's like to be judged for things that aren't your fault, to have people assume the worst because it's easier than seeing the truth. Something in his voice made Lydia look at him more carefully. There were shadows in his eyes that matched her own, a wariness that spoke of pain that had never quite healed. What happened to you? That's a long story. Maybe one I'll tell you someday, if you're willing to listen. He settled his hat back on his head. For now, I just wanted to say, You're welcome in this town, Miss Hale, no matter what anyone else says. And if Tucker or anyone else bothers you, you come find me. That's not a favor. That's my job." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Lydia closed the door slowly and returned to her work, but her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up the needle again. She didn't trust kindness. Experience had taught her that kindness usually came with conditions, with expectations that would eventually be used against her. But something about Caleb Rowan felt different. He had asked for nothing, offered friendship without demanding anything in return. It was so foreign to her experience that she didn't know how to process it. The days passed in a rhythm of work and solitude. True to her word, Mrs. Chen was gone for the entire week, leaving Lydia alone with the mounting pile of commissions. She worked late into the nights, her lamp burning long after the rest of the town had gone dark. It was easier to work than to think, easier to lose herself in seams and stitches than to examine the hollow ache in her chest that never quite went away. On Thursday afternoon, a woman Lydia didn't recognize climbed the stairs and entered without knocking. She was perhaps 40, with elaborate curls and a dress that was far too fine for a mining town. Her expression was cool as she surveyed the small shop. "You're the seamstress," she said. It wasn't a question. "I need a dress altered, quickly." Lydia set down her work and stood. "Of course. If you'd like to try it on, I can. I'm not trying on anything in this place." The woman's lip curled slightly. "Just take in the waist by 2 inches. I'll send my maid to collect it tomorrow." She dropped the dress on the table and swept out before Lydia could even confirm the timeline was possible. The dress was beautiful, emerald silk with black lace trim, but when Lydia examined it, she found the construction was shoddy. The seams were uneven, the hem was crooked, and whoever had sewn it originally had clearly been in a hurry or didn't care about quality. She spent the next several hours not just taking in the waist, but correcting all the other issues as well. It was more work than she'd been asked to do, more work than she'd be paid for, but she couldn't bring herself to return a garment that wasn't perfect. Her pride wouldn't allow it. The maid appeared the next day as promised, a timid girl who looked terrified of everything. "Mrs. Whitmore sent me for the dress," she whispered. Lydia handed it over, carefully wrapped. "Please tell Mrs. Whitmore that I corrected some construction issues in addition to taking in the waist. There's no additional charge." The girl's eyes widened. "You fixed it? But Mrs. Whitmore said—" She stopped abruptly, her face flushing. "Thank you, miss. I'll tell her." 2 hours later, Mrs. Whitmore herself returned, the dress in her hands. For a horrible moment, Lydia thought she was angry about the additional work, but when the woman spoke, her voice was grudgingly respectful. "My maid said you fixed the entire dress, not just what I asked for. The construction was poor, I couldn't let it go out like that. This dress cost me $40 in Virginia City. The dressmaker there told me it was the finest work available." Mrs. Whitmore's expression was hard to read. "You're saying she cheated me?" Lydia chose her words carefully. "I'm saying the work wasn't up to the standard it should have been for that price. If you'd like, I can show you—" "That won't be necessary." Mrs. Whitmore set the dress down and opened her reticule. "What do I owe you for the alterations?" $2 was the agreed price. "For the amount of work you did?" Mrs. Whitmore counted out $5. "I'm not a fool, Miss Hale. I know quality when I see it, even if I have to swallow my pride to admit I was wrong about you." After she left, Lydia stared at the coins in her hand. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a small crack in the wall of judgment that surrounded her. That evening, as she was closing up the shop, she heard shouting from the street below. She moved to the window and saw Tucker staggering down the main street, a bottle in his hand, yelling at anyone who would listen. "That woman up there!" He pointed directly at her window. "She's a witch. Put a curse on me, she did. Haven't had a moment's luck since she came to town." Lydia's heart sank. It was happening again. The accusations would get wilder, the townspeople more suspicious, until staying became impossible. She stepped back from the window, her breath coming short. But then she saw Caleb emerge from the sheriff's office. He didn't shout or draw his gun. He simply walked up to Tucker, took the bottle from his hand, and said something Lydia couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it made Tucker deflate like a punctured balloon. Caleb steered him toward the jail, one hand on his shoulder, not rough, but implacable. The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, muttering among themselves. Lydia waited for someone to look up at her window with accusation in their eyes. But no one did. They just went back to their business, as if drunken ravings were too common to merit real attention. Later that night, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Caleb standing there, looking tired. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right," he said. "Tucker's sleeping it off in a cell. He'll be apologizing to you in the morning, even if I have to drag him up here by his ear." "That's not necessary," Lydia said quietly. "I'm used to it." "Well, you shouldn't be." There was an edge of anger in his voice, though she didn't think it was directed at her. "You shouldn't have to be used to being treated like that." "Sheriff Rowan, Caleb, please. Sheriff makes me feel like I'm arresting someone." Despite everything, Lydia felt a small smile tug at her lips. "Caleb, then. Why are you doing this, really? What do you get out of defending me?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because somebody should," he said finally. "Because you deserve it. And because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I know what it's like to carry shame that isn't yours to carry. To have people judge you for something that wasn't your fault or for mistakes you've already paid for 100 times over." "What did you do?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Like I said, that's a long story." He glanced down the street, where lanterns were being lit against the gathering dusk. "But if you ever want to hear it, if you ever want to trade stories about the things that haunt us, I'm willing. No judgment, no expectations, just honesty." After he left, Lydia stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the town settle into evening. Two men stood talking outside the saloon. A woman carried a basket of laundry past. A dog trotted down the street, purpose in its stride. Normal life continuing around her but not quite including her. But maybe, just maybe, that was starting to change. The following week, Mrs. Chen returned from Sacramento with new fabric and a satisfied expression. "I see you haven't fled yet," she said, examining the completed work laid out on the table. "Good. That would have been disappointing." "Mrs. Whitmore came back," Lydia said. "She paid extra for the work." "Of course she did. Rebecca Whitmore is many things, but she recognizes value when it's pointed out to her." Mrs. Chen ran her fingers over the wedding dress, now nearly complete. "This is beautiful work, Miss Hale. Mrs. Harrison will be very pleased." "I hope so." "You hope so?" Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. "You should know so. This is the finest dressmaking this town has seen in 5 years. You have a gift." Lydia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Compliments always made her uncomfortable. They felt like traps, like something that could be taken away as soon as she started to believe them. "I just do what needs to be done." "That's not humility, that's fear," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "You're afraid to claim your own skill because someone once used your confidence against you. Am I wrong?" The question landed like a blow. Lydia's hands stilled on the fabric she'd been folding. "How did you— I told you, I watch people." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I came to this country when I was 16. I was supposed to marry a merchant in San Francisco, but he died before I arrived. So there I was, alone in a foreign country, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the knowledge my mother had given me. Do you know what I learned?" Lydia shook her head. "I learned that the world is full of people who will tell you what you're worth. And most of them will tell you you're worth less than you are because it benefits them to have you believe it. Employers who want cheap labor, men who want compliant wives, communities that need someone to look down on so they can feel superior." Mrs. Chen moved to the window, looking out at the street below. "The only defense against that is to know your own worth and refuse to negotiate it." "That's easier said than done." "Of course it is. Everything worth doing is hard." Mrs. Chen turned back to face her. "But you're doing it already, whether you realize it or not. You're still here. You're still working. You haven't let them drive you away. That takes strength, Miss Hale. More strength than most people have." That evening, Lydia attended another town gathering, this time a barn dance at the Sullivan Ranch, just outside town. Mrs. Chen had insisted again, and Lydia was starting to realize that her employer's insistence was less about social propriety and more about forcing her to engage with the community. The Sullivan Ranch was modest but well-maintained, with a large barn that had been cleared for dancing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the assembled townspeople. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and the music was lively enough to set feet tapping. Lydia stood near the door, ready to bolt if necessary. But this time, something was different. Mrs. Whitmore caught her eye and gave a slight nod, not quite friendly, but acknowledging. Lily ran up with a torn hem and a pleading look, and Lydia found herself laughing as she knelt to pin it temporarily. Mr. Sullivan pressed a cup of cider into her hand and thanked her again for the shirts. Small things, tiny cracks in the wall, and then Caleb appeared at her elbow, looking even more uncomfortable in social situations than she felt. "Miss Hale." "Lydia, if I may?" She nodded, too surprised by the use of her first name to object. "I'm not much of a dancer," he said, "but if you'd be willing to take a turn with someone who'll probably step on your feet, I'd be honored." Lydia's first instinct was to refuse, but Mrs. Chen's words echoed in her mind. Permission to exist, the right to take up space in the world. "I'm not much of a dancer either," she said, setting down her cup. "But I suppose we can step on each other's feet together." His smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. He led her onto the floor as a slower song began, and placed one hand carefully at her waist, the other holding hers with a gentleness that suggested he was very aware of respecting her boundaries. They moved through the dance, and he was right. He wasn't graceful. But there was something solid and reassuring about him, something that made her feel safer than she had in years. "Thank you," she said quietly, barely audible over the music. "For Tucker, for everything." "You don't need to thank me for basic decency," Caleb replied. "Though I'll admit, decency isn't as common as it should be. Still, it means something, more than you probably realize." They danced in silence for a moment, and then Caleb spoke again, his voice low. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want." Lydia tensed but nodded. "What are you running from?" The question should have offended her. Instead, it felt like relief, like someone finally seeing her clearly and not looking away. "How did you know I was running?" "Because I ran too, for a long time, and I recognized the look in someone's eyes when they're always watching the exits, always ready to disappear." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "You don't have to tell me, but if you ever want to, I promise it won't change how I see you." The music swelled around them, and Lydia felt something inside her begin to shift. Not break open, not yet, but shift, like a locked door discovering its hinges still worked after years of being sealed shut. "A man in Philadelphia," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard Thornton. He courted me, proposed marriage. But he didn't want a wife. He wanted a possession, something beautiful to display, to control. When I refused to be that, when I ended the engagement, She paused, swallowing hard. "He made sure I could never return to Philadelphia society. Spread lies about my character, my virtue. Made it impossible for me to find work, to be accepted anywhere." "So you ran?" "So I ran. St. Louis, Denver, Virginia City, and now here." She met his eyes, expecting to see pity or disgust. Instead, she saw only understanding. Each time, something happens. Some incident that resurrects the whispers, that makes people look at me like I'm tainted. And I run again. "What if you stopped running?" Caleb asked. "What if you stayed and made them see the truth?" "I don't know how to do that." "Maybe you don't do it alone." The dance ended, and they stood there for a moment longer, neither quite ready to break apart. Then someone called Caleb's name, something about a dispute that needed settling, and the spell was broken. But as Lydia made her way back to the edge of the room, she felt different, lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth aloud had released some of the poison she'd been carrying. She was gathering her shawl to leave when Mrs. Patterson approached, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "Miss Hale, I wanted to thank you for the dress alterations. And to apologize." Lydia blinked in surprise. "Apologize? For what?" "For not speaking up sooner, at the social, when Tucker made those accusations. I knew they were nonsense. Everyone knows Tucker can't be trusted when he's been drinking, but I didn't say anything. I let you stand there alone." Mrs. Patterson's expression was genuinely remorseful. That was cowardly of me, and I'm sorry. Oh, you don't need to apologize, Lydia said, though the words meant more than she could express. Really? Yes, I do. We all do. Mrs. Patterson glanced around the barn at the people dancing and laughing. This town can be hard on outsiders. We're so far from everything else that we get insular, suspicious. But that's not an excuse for cruelty. You've been nothing but professional and kind since you arrived, and you deserve better than whispers and accusations. After Mrs. Patterson walked away, Lydia stood there feeling oddly shaken. 2 apologies in as many weeks. People defending her. Caleb standing with her on the dance floor where everyone could see. It was too much, too fast. She didn't know how to trust it. But as she walked back to town in the cool night air, the sounds of the barn dance fading behind her, she found herself thinking about Caleb's question. What if she stopped running? What if she stayed and fought for her place here? The idea was terrifying, but it was also, for the first time in 3 years, possible. She was halfway up the stairs to her room when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart racing, and found Caleb at the bottom of the stairs, slightly out of breath. I wanted to make sure you got back safely, he said. The walk from Sullivan's place isn't far, but it's dark. I'm perfectly capable of walking in the dark, Sheriff. Caleb, and I know you are, but I wanted to anyway. He paused, then added, I also wanted to tell you something about my own past, since you shared yours. Lydia descended a few steps, close enough to see his face clearly in the moonlight. You don't have to. I want to. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. I told you I understood what it was like to carry shame. That wasn't idle talk. 10 years ago, I was young and stupid and angry at the world. Got mixed up with some men who were robbing stagecoaches. I didn't shoot anyone, didn't hurt anyone, but I was there. I participated. And I got caught. Lydia felt her breath catch. You were an outlaw. I was. Spent 3 years in prison for it. When I got out, I had nothing. No money, no prospects, no one who'd trust me. I drifted for a while, took whatever work I could find. Then I ended up here, and the previous sheriff, old Tom Brennan, he took a chance on me, made me his deputy, taught me that what you did yesterday doesn't have to define what you do tomorrow. And the town knows this? They do. Some of them, anyway. The older residents, the ones who were here when Tom hired me. When he died 2 years ago and the town needed a new sheriff, there were plenty who said I shouldn't get the job, said you couldn't trust a former outlaw with a badge. He met her eyes. But enough people spoke up for me, said they'd seen who I was now, not just who I'd been. So I got the job. Plus, Lydia understood what he was telling her, not just his history, but the path he'd walked from shame to redemption, the possibility that she could walk it too. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. Thank you for listening. He settled his hat back on his head. Good night, Lydia, and welcome to Redwood Creek, for real this time. As she climbed the rest of the stairs to her room, Lydia felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It took her a long moment to recognize it. Hope. The hope Lydia had felt that night proved fragile in the days that followed. She woke each morning half expecting it to have evaporated like morning dew, but somehow it persisted, a small warm ember in her chest that refused to be extinguished. Work continued to flow steadily through the shop, and with each satisfied customer, each coin added to her hidden savings, she felt herself growing incrementally more solid, more real. Mrs. Harrison collected the wedding dress on a Wednesday afternoon, tears streaming down her face as she held the garment up to the light. My Sarah will look like an angel, she whispered, running her fingers over the delicate lacework. Miss Hale, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'm glad you're pleased, Lydia said, feeling warmth spread through her chest at the genuine emotion in the woman's voice. Pleased? I'm overwhelmed. Mrs. Harrison carefully folded the dress and placed it in the box she'd brought. My husband and I would be honored if you'd attend the wedding. It's this Saturday at the church, and there'll be a celebration afterward. Lydia's immediate instinct was to refuse, to hide behind some polite excuse, but she thought of Caleb's words, of Mrs. Chen's insistence that she stop apologizing for existing. I'd be delighted to come, she heard herself say. After Mrs. Harrison left, Lydia stood at the window watching her walk down the street, the box held carefully in her arms. The woman had invited her, not out of obligation, but genuine desire. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. That evening, Caleb appeared at her door with a basket covered in cloth. "Mrs. Patterson made too much stew," he said, though his expression suggested this was a carefully constructed excuse. "Thought you might like some." Lydia accepted the basket, the warmth of it seeping through the cloth. "Tell Mrs. Patterson thank you, though I suspect she didn't accidentally make too much of anything." "You'd be right about that." Caleb shifted his weight, seeming uncertain. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like some company while you eat it, unless you prefer dining alone, which I'd understand." The invitation surprised her, but not unpleasantly. She stepped aside to let him in, suddenly aware of how sparse her living space was. Just the cot, the table where she worked, the trunk with her few belongings. No decorations, no personal touches beyond her mother's Bible on the small shelf. It was the room of someone always ready to flee. "It's not much," she said, feeling the need to apologize. "It's honest," Caleb replied, removing his hat. "No pretense. I appreciate that." They sat at the small table, sharing the stew Mrs. Patterson had sent. For a while they ate in comfortable silence, but Lydia found herself watching him, the way he moved with deliberate care in the confined space, the way his eyes took in everything without judgment. There was a quietness to him that she found soothing, so different from Richard's constant need to dominate every conversation, every room. "Can I ask you something?" Lydia said finally, setting down her spoon. "Of course." "That night at the dance, you said you recognized that I was running. How long did you run before you stopped?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his bowl. 5 years, give or take. After I got out of prison, I couldn't stay anywhere for long. Every time someone found out about my past, I'd get run out of town or worse. Had a man in Colorado threaten to lynch me just for walking into his store. Said he didn't want criminals touching his merchandise. That's horrible. It was life. My life, anyway. I got used to moving on before I could get attached to anything or anyone. He met her eyes. Then I came here, and Tom Brennan didn't ask about my past. He asked what kind of man I wanted to be going forward. First person who'd ever asked me that. And what did you tell him? I told him I wanted to be someone who helped instead of hurt, someone people could depend on. He said that was good enough for him, and he'd give me the chance to prove it. Caleb's expression softened with memory. Took me 2 more years after that to really stop running, to believe that this place could actually be home. Lydia absorbed this, feeling the weight of his words. "Do you ever worry it'll be taken away? That something will happen and you'll have to start over again?" "Every day," he admitted, "but I learned something from Tom. He said living in fear of loss isn't really living at all. It's just a slower kind of dying. So I decided to stop dying and start living, consequences be damned." They finished the meal in thoughtful silence, and when Caleb prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "The Harrison wedding this Saturday. May I escort you?" Lydia felt her heart skip. It was one thing to dance with him at a barn social, another thing entirely to arrive together at a formal event. It would be a public declaration of sorts, an alignment that would inevitably invite speculation and gossip. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his usually stern features. "Good. I'll collect you Saturday morning, if that suits." After he left, Lydia sat on her cot, her hands trembling slightly. She had just made a choice, a real choice, to step into visibility instead of retreating into shadow. The thought terrified her, but beneath the terror was something else. Excitement, perhaps. Or the beginning of courage. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of work and anticipation. Lydia finished the Dawson boys' church clothes and started on Mr. Chen's suits. She worked late into the nights, partly because the commissions demanded it, partly because sleep had become elusive. Her mind kept circling back to Saturday, to what it would mean to walk into that church on Caleb's arm. On Friday evening, Mrs. Chen appeared with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it," she commanded, settling into the chair by the window. Inside was fabric, beautiful deep blue cotton with a subtle pattern woven through it. Enough for a dress, and of far better quality than anything Lydia could have afforded on her own. "Mrs. Chen, I can't accept this." "You can and you will. You're attending a wedding tomorrow, and you need something better than that worn gray thing you've been wearing." Mrs. Chen's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, it's not charity. Consider it payment for all the extra work you've been doing. The corrections you make without being asked, the care you take with every piece. You've earned it." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just make yourself something beautiful and wear it with your head high." Mrs. Chen stood to leave, then paused. "And Miss Hale? I'm glad you're staying. I think Redwood Creek is better with you in it." After she left, Lydia spread the fabric on her work table, running her hands over the smooth surface. There wasn't enough time to make anything elaborate, but she could manage something simple and elegant. She worked through the night, her needle flying, pouring all her skill and hope into every stitch. By dawn, she had a dress that fit her perfectly, that made her look like someone who belonged somewhere. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear, the kind of spring day that promised summer wasn't far behind. Lydia dressed carefully, pinning up her dark hair and studying herself in the small mirror. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow. Still cautious, still carrying shadows in her eyes, but no longer quite so defeated. Caleb arrived precisely when he'd said he would, wearing what must have been his only suit. It was slightly worn at the elbows, but clean and well-maintained. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simplicity of the compliment made it feel true. They walked to the church together through the awakening town, and Lydia felt eyes on them from every direction. She kept her chin up, her hand resting lightly on Caleb's offered arm, refusing to shrink from the attention. Let them look, let them wonder. She was done apologizing for existing. The church was small but lovingly maintained, its white paint gleaming in the morning sun. Inside, it was already crowded with townspeople in their Sunday best. Lydia felt the whispers start as they entered, felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing, judging, speculating. But Caleb's presence beside her was steady, grounding, and she found she could breathe through the discomfort. They found seats near the back, and Lydia let herself focus on the beauty of the moment rather than the whispers. Flowers adorned every available surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Someone had strung ribbons along the pews, and when Sarah Harrison entered in the dress Lydia had made, there was a collective gasp of admiration. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and Lydia found herself unexpectedly moved by the vows being exchanged. To have and to hold, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. She had once believed in such promises, back when she was young and naive enough to think love could conquer anything. Richard had taught her differently, but watching Sarah and her groom, seeing the genuine love in their eyes, she felt something long dormant stir in her chest. Maybe she had just chosen the wrong person to believe in. The celebration afterward was held in the field behind the church, with tables laden with food and a small platform set up for dancing. Lydia braced herself for awkwardness, for the subtle cuts and cold shoulders she'd learned to expect. But something had shifted. Mrs. Harrison sought her out specifically to introduce her to her daughter. "Sarah, this is Miss Hale, the seamstress who made your dress. Isn't it the most beautiful work you've ever seen?" Sarah, radiant with happiness, took Lydia's hands in hers. "It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I felt like a princess walking down that aisle, and it's all because of you." "I'm so glad," Lydia managed, overwhelmed by the genuine warmth in the young woman's voice. "You must make my going-away outfit too," Sarah continued. "And when we're settled in Sacramento, I'll send all my friends to you. You're too talented to stay hidden in this little town." It was perhaps the highest compliment Lydia had ever received, and she felt tears threaten again. But these were different tears, tears of being seen, of being valued for her skill rather than judged for her past. As the afternoon wore on, Lydia found herself drawn into conversations she would normally have avoided. Mrs. Whitmore discussed fashion trends from the East with surprising knowledge, and even asked Lydia's professional opinion. Mr. Sullivan introduced her to his brother, who was visiting from Oregon and needed a new suit. Even Tucker, sober for once, approached with hat in hand and mumbled an apology that sounded almost sincere. "I was wrong to accuse you that day," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I was drunk and stupid, and I'm sorry for the trouble I caused." Lydia could have held on to her anger, could have made him grovel, but she found she had no desire to. "Thank you for the apology, Mr. Tucker. I accept it." After he left, Caleb appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of lemonade. "That was gracious of you. What would be the point of holding a grudge? He's just a lonely, unhappy man looking for someone to blame for his problems." She accepted the glass gratefully. "I've been that person, not drunk, but definitely looking for someone to blame. It doesn't help." They found a quiet spot away from the main celebration, sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the field. From here, they could see the mountains rising in the distance, still snow-capped and majestic. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold. "I've been thinking about what you asked me," Caleb said after a while, "about what I'm getting out of defending you. And I realize the question itself shows how much you've been hurt." Lydia turned to look at him. "What do you mean? You can't imagine that someone might defend you simply because it's right. There has to be an angle, a benefit, something they're getting out of it, because that's what you've learned, that kindness always comes with a price." His gray eyes were intense, serious. "But what if it doesn't? What if some people are just good, just decent, without expecting anything in return?" "I want to believe that," Lydia said quietly. "I do, but it's hard to trust when trust has been used against you so many times." "I know, but Lydia—" He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I need you to understand something. My interest in you, my desire to defend you, to be your friend, it's not just about being decent. It's also because I—" He stopped, frustration crossing his face. "I'm not good with words. Never have been." "Try," she said softly, her heart beating faster. "From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, looking terrified but determined not to show it, I was drawn to you. And every conversation we've had since has only made that stronger. You're brave in ways you don't even realize. You're skilled and smart, and you care about doing things right, even when no one's watching. And you've survived things that would have broken most people." He turned to face her fully. "So yes, I defend you because it's right. But I also defend you because I care about you. More than I probably should, given how recently we met." Lydia felt like all the air had left her lungs. No one had spoken to her like this in 3 years. No one had seen her as anything but damaged goods, a woman with a tainted reputation. But Caleb was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything from you, Lydia. I just wanted you to know the truth. Because I'm tired of hiding things, tired of pretending to be less than I am or feel less than I do." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "You asked me once what I was running from, but maybe the better question is what I was running toward. And I think I've been running toward you all along, even before I knew you existed." The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying. Lydia wanted to believe them so badly it hurt, but fear was a powerful thing, and it whispered that this was too good to be true, that something would ruin it, that she would be hurt again. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The last man who said he cared about me used it to control me. When I wouldn't be controlled, he destroyed my life. I'm not him." Caleb's voice was firm, certain. "And I would never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. Your strength, your independence, your skill, those aren't things to be suppressed or controlled. They're things to be celebrated. You say that now, I'll say it tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that if you'll let me." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I understand if you need time, if you need proof. I can wait. I'm good at waiting." Before Lydia could respond, a commotion erupted from the main celebration. Raised voices, the sound of something crashing. They both stood quickly and hurried back to find a man she'd never seen before standing in the center of the crowd, his expensive suit and polished bearing setting him apart from the rough-hewn miners and ranchers. Her blood turned to ice. She would know that profile anywhere, those aristocratic features that she'd once thought handsome. Richard Thornton had found her. "There she is," Richard said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Lydia, darling, I've been searching for you for months. Caleb moved slightly in front of her, a subtle shift that put himself between her and Richard. Who are you? Richard Thornton, of the Philadelphia Thorntons. Richard's smile was charming, practiced, and completely false. And you are? Sheriff Caleb Rowan. This is my jurisdiction, and you're disrupting a celebration. State your business or move along. My business is with my fiancée. Richard's eyes locked on Lydia, and she saw the anger beneath the polished surface. Lydia, this game has gone on long enough. It's time to come home and stop embarrassing yourself with this vagabond lifestyle. I'm not your fiancé, Lydia said, finding her voice though it shook. I haven't been for 3 years. You need to leave. Is that what you've been telling people? That we ended our engagement? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Darling, everyone knows you had a nervous breakdown and ran away. I've been faithfully waiting for you to recover your senses. The lies were so smooth, so believable, that Lydia saw doubt flicker across several faces in the crowd. This was what Richard did best. He controlled narratives, shaped perceptions, made people believe his version of reality. That's not true, she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. Isn't it? Richard pulled a folded paper from his coat. I have a letter here from your aunt in Philadelphia, begging me to find you and bring you home. She's been worried sick. My aunt is dead, Lydia said flatly. She died 6 months before I left Philadelphia, so whoever wrote that letter, it wasn't her. Richard's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. You're obviously still unwell, Lydia, confused. But don't worry, I'm here to take care of you now. We'll go somewhere quiet, somewhere you can rest and recover. She's not going anywhere with you. Caleb's voice cut through Richard's practiced speech like a knife. The lady says she's not your fiancée. That's the end of it. With all due respect, Sheriff, this is a private matter between myself and my intended. I don't see how it concerns you. It concerns me because you're harassing a resident of my town, and from what I'm hearing, you've been doing it for 3 years. Caleb's hand rested on his gun belt, not threatening, but present. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. You can leave Redwood Creek peacefully, or I can escort you out. Your preference. Richard's facade cracked, revealing the rage underneath. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Sheriff. My family has connections that reach all the way to Washington. One telegram from me could end your career. Maybe, but that won't change the fact that you're leaving today. Caleb didn't move, didn't raise his voice, but there was steel in every word. Lydia Hale is under my protection, and I don't take kindly to men who threaten women. Now move along before I find a reason to hold you in a cell for the night. For a tense moment, Lydia thought Richard might push it further, but he must have seen something in Caleb's eyes that told him this was a fight he wouldn't win. He turned his attention back to Lydia, his expression hardening. This isn't over, he said quietly, meant only for her. You can't hide forever. Sooner or later, you'll have to face the consequences of humiliating me. The only thing I need to face, Lydia said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice, is the future I'm building here, without you. You don't own me, Richard. You never did. And I'm done running from the lies you spread. She saw shock flicker across his face. He had clearly expected her to crumble, to be the same frightened girl he'd terrorized 3 years ago. But she wasn't that girl anymore. Redwood Creek, Mrs. Chen, Caleb, even the townspeople who were slowly learning to accept her, they had shown her that she was more than Richard's victim. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Caleb stepped forward. I believe the lady has made herself clear. Now, there's a stage leaving for Sacramento in an hour. I strongly suggest you be on it. 2 of the ranch hands, Sullivan's sons, both large and capable looking, moved to flank Richard. The message was clear. He could leave peacefully, or he could be made to leave. But he was leaving. Richard smoothed down his coat with hands that trembled slightly with suppressed rage. You'll regret this, Lydia. All of you will. He stalked away toward town, his expensive boots kicking up dust. The crowd watched him go in stunned silence, then slowly began to murmur among themselves. Lydia felt her knees weaken, and Caleb was there immediately, his hand supporting her elbow. Are you all right? I don't know, she whispered. He found me. After all this time, he actually found me. And he's leaving. You faced him down, Lydia. Do you understand that? You stood up to him. Caleb's voice was fierce with pride. That took incredible courage. Mrs. Chen pushed through the crowd, her expression thunderous. Was that the man from Philadelphia? The one who destroyed your reputation? Lydia could only nod, still shaking from the confrontation. Good riddance, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. Then louder, addressing the assembled crowd. I don't know what lies that man might have told you, but I've known Miss Hale for 2 months now. She's honest, hardworking, and talented. Whatever happened in Philadelphia is none of our business. What matters is who she is here, now in Redwood Creek, and anyone who can't see that is a fool. There was a moment of silence, and then Mrs. Harrison spoke up. Mrs. Chen is right. Miss Hale made my daughter's wedding dress, and it's the finest work I've ever seen. That tells me everything I need to know about her character. She fixed my dress and didn't tell my mama I was climbing fences, Lily added, her young voice clear in the quiet. That's what being kind looks like. One by one, others spoke up. Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Patterson, even Mrs. Whitmore, grudgingly but genuinely. They weren't defending her out of pity. They were defending her because they had seen her work, her character, her worth. Because she had earned their respect through her actions, not through her past. Lydia felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of belonging. This town, these people, were standing with her, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and most people had returned to their homes, Caleb walked Lydia back to the shop. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the mountains looked like they were on fire. He'll come back, Lydia said quietly. Richard doesn't give up, ever. Maybe, but if he does, he'll find things different than he expects. Caleb stopped at the bottom of the stairs leading to her room. You're not alone anymore, Lydia. You have people here who care about you, who will stand with you, including me. Why? The question burst out of her. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. I know enough. Caleb reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. I know you've survived things that would have destroyed most people. I know you're brave and skilled and kind, even when the world hasn't been kind to you. And I know that when I look at you, I see exactly who I've been searching for all my life, even when I didn't know I was searching. An da timem sut ka kuk doimin, Lydia whispered, the Vietnamese words falling from her lips without thought. That's what you're saying. I don't know what that means, but yes. Probably yes. Caleb smiled softly. You don't have to believe me yet. You don't have to trust me, but I'll keep showing up, keep proving it until you do. Because you're worth it, Lydia. You're worth everything. She stood there in the gathering dark, this man before her offering everything she'd been afraid to want. And for the first time in 3 years, she let herself consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could have it. Chang ai tung muon em ka, she said softly. No one has ever wanted me. Not really. Not for who I am. Then they were all fools, Caleb said fiercely, because who you are is extraordinary. He left her there with those words hanging in the air like a promise, like a benediction, like the first line of a new story she was finally ready to write. Lydia woke the next morning to find the town transformed. Not in any visible way. The buildings still stood weathered and proud. The mountains still loomed in the distance. The dust still swirled in the street below. But something fundamental had shifted, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She dressed slowly, her hands steadier than they'd been in months, and descended to the shop to find a line of customers already waiting. Mrs. Patterson stood at the front, a basket covered with cloth in her hands. We thought you might need some breakfast after yesterday, she said, her smile genuine and warm. That was quite an ordeal. Behind her, 3 other women nodded in agreement. Mrs. Whitmore, surprisingly, was among them. That man was a bully and a liar, she said bluntly. Anyone with eyes could see it. You handled him with more grace than he deserved. Lydia felt emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, all of you, for standing with me. Oh, that's what neighbors do, Mrs. Patterson said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if Lydia had always been one of them, instead of an outsider barely tolerated. The day passed in a blur of work and unexpected kindness. Mr. Sullivan stopped by to commission another shirt. Young Lily brought a torn skirt and stayed to chat, telling Lydia about her lessons at school and her dreams of one day traveling to San Francisco. Even Tucker appeared, sober and shamefaced, with a pair of trousers that needed mending. "I want to apologize proper," he said, hat literally in hand. "Not just for the accusations when you first arrived, but for every drunk rant since. My wife left me 2 years back, took our daughter with her, and I've been drowning in a bottle ever since. But that's no excuse for how I treated you." "Thank you, Mr. Tucker," Lydia said, taking the trousers. "I accept your apology." "Sheriff Rowan said something to me yesterday that stuck. He said a man's character isn't measured by his mistakes, but by what he does after he makes them." Tucker met her eyes briefly before looking away. "I'm trying to do better, trying to be the kind of man my daughter could be proud of, if she ever comes back." After he left, Lydia stood at the window, watching the street below with new eyes. These people weren't perfect. They made mistakes, held grudges, drank too much, gossiped without thinking. But they were also capable of growth, of change, of choosing kindness when it mattered. And slowly, painfully, they were choosing to see her as one of their own. She was threading a needle when she heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Her heart jumped. Richard, back to make good on his threats, but it was Caleb who appeared in the doorway, his expression serious. "I need to talk to you about Thornton," he said without preamble. Lydia set down her work, fear coiling in her stomach. "What about him?" "He didn't leave town yesterday. I've had word from the livery that he's taken a room at the boarding house, and he's been asking questions about you, about me, about who owns what property in town." Caleb moved into the room, closing the door behind him. "I don't trust his intentions, Lydia. Men like that don't give up easily, especially when they've been publicly humiliated." "I know." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself. "Richard is nothing if not persistent and vindictive. Back in Philadelphia, there was a shopkeeper who refused to let him return some merchandise. Within a month, the man's business had failed. Richard never admitted to orchestrating it, but everyone knew. Then we need to be prepared." Caleb pulled a chair close and sat facing her. "I want you to tell me everything about him. His methods, his connections, anything that might help me anticipate what he'll do next." So Lydia told him. She told him about Richard's family wealth, built on shipping and banking, about his political connections that reached into the highest levels of government, about his charm that could convince people of almost anything, and his ruthlessness when that charm failed. She told him about the campaign of whispers and insinuations he'd waged after she'd broken their engagement, how he'd systematically turned every friend she had against her, how he'd made sure no respectable household would hire her for any kind of work. "He told everyone I was mentally unstable," she said, her voice hollow with remembered pain, "that I'd become hysterical and delusional, that the engagement had been broken because I'd accused him of imaginary crimes. And because he was Richard Thornton, wealthy and connected and charming, everyone believed him. My own aunt, before she died, she believed him over me, told me I needed to apologize and beg his forgiveness. So you ran instead." "What else could I do? Stay and watch him destroy what little I had left?" Lydia stood and moved to the window, staring out at the mountains. "I thought if I went far enough, he'd eventually give up. Let me go. But I underestimated how much he needs to win, to be in control. Me leaving, refusing to submit, it's the one thing he can't tolerate." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Men like Thornton, they thrive on power imbalances, on being able to manipulate situations to their advantage. But out here, his usual advantages don't count for as much. His family connections, his social standing, those mean less in a mining town than they would in Philadelphia. But he still has money. Money can buy a lot, even out here." "True, which is why we need to stay vigilant." Caleb stood and moved to stand beside her at the window. "I've asked my deputy to keep watch on the boarding house, and I've put word out to some friends in Sacramento and San Francisco, people who owe me favors, to dig into Thornton's activities. If he's planning something, I want to know about it." Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had inserted himself into her life and refused to leave even when staying meant taking on her battles. "Why are you doing all this, Caleb? Really? You could have just escorted him out of town yesterday and been done with it. But you're investigating him, using favors, putting yourself at risk. Why? Because I meant what I said yesterday. Caleb's gray eyes were steady, unflinching. I've been looking for you all my life. And now that I've found you, I'm not going to let some entitled bastard from Philadelphia ruin it. The words hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Lydia wanted to believe them so badly it hurt, but 3 years of running had taught her to be cautious, to expect the worst, to protect her heart at all costs. What if this doesn't work? She whispered. What if he wins anyway? What if I have to run again? Then I'll come with you. Caleb said it so simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. But I don't think it'll come to that. You're not alone anymore, Lydia, and that changes everything. The next few days passed in an uneasy tension. Lydia continued her work, but she was hyper-aware of every sound on the stairs, every shadow that passed her window. Richard was out there somewhere, watching, planning, waiting for his moment. She could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. Caleb stopped by each evening, sometimes with food, sometimes just to check on her. He never stayed long, aware of her reputation and not wanting to damage it further, but his presence was reassuring. Mrs. Chen, back from yet another mysterious business trip, seemed to sense the tension and stayed close, working in the shop more than usual. That man is still in town, she said one afternoon, her fingers flying through a pile of mending. I've seen him, walking around, talking to people, asking questions. He's up to something. I know. Lydia's hands were steady on her needle, but her jaw was tight. I just wish I knew what. She found out 3 days later when Mrs. Patterson arrived at the shop, her face drawn with distress. Miss Hale, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Lydia set down her work, dread pooling in her stomach. What is it? That Mr. Thornton has been spreading rumors, terrible rumors. He's telling people that you stole money from him in Philadelphia, that you fled to avoid prosecution. He's saying he came here to retrieve what you took, not to reconcile. Mrs. Patterson twisted her hands together. Most people aren't believing him. We know you better than that now. But some of the newer folks, the ones who don't know you, they're starting to talk. It was exactly what Lydia had feared. Richard couldn't physically force her to return, not with Caleb and the town standing against him. So he was doing what he did best, poisoning the well, turning opinion against her, making it impossible for her to stay. How much is he saying I stole? $500. He has documents, he says, proof of the theft. Mrs. Patterson reached out and grasped Lydia's hand. We don't believe him, but I thought you should know what he's doing. After she left, Lydia sat motionless at her sewing table, her mind racing. $500 was a fortune, more money than she'd make in years of sewing. If Richard had forged documents to support his claim, if he could convince enough people. She was still sitting there when Caleb arrived, his expression grim. You've heard. Mrs. Patterson told me. There's more. Caleb pulled up a chair, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. He's filed a formal complaint with the Territorial Marshal's office, claiming theft and fraud. They're sending someone to investigate. Lydia felt the world tilt beneath her. When? Within the week, probably. Depends on how quickly they can spare someone. Caleb leaned forward, his eyes intense. But Lydia, listen to me. This is good news. How is this possibly good news? Because it brings this into the open. No more whispers and rumors. Now there will be an official investigation, which means evidence, testimony, facts, and the facts are on your side. Caleb's voice was fierce with certainty. You didn't steal anything, which means Thornton either has forged documents or no documents at all. Either way, he's the one committing a crime now, not you. You don't understand how persuasive he can be, Lydia said, fear making her voice sharp. How convincing. He'll have documents that look real, witnesses who'll swear to anything he wants them to say, and I'll have nothing but my word against his. You'll have more than that. You'll have this town. You'll have Mrs. Chen, who can testify to your character and your work ethic. You'll have your customers, who can speak to your honesty. You'll have me. Caleb reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. And you'll have the truth, which is more powerful than you think. Lydia wanted to believe him, but she'd seen what Richard could do with lies dressed up as truth. What if that's not enough? Then we'll find another way. But Lydia, he waited until she met his eyes. You need to decide something. Are you going to keep running, keep letting him chase you from place to place, keep living in fear, or are you going to stand and fight? The question landed like a challenge. For 3 years, running had been her only option, her only defense. But running meant never having a home, never having roots, never having anything she couldn't carry in a single carpet bag. Running meant living half a life, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the next catastrophe. I'm tired of running, she said quietly. Then don't. Caleb squeezed her hand. Stay, fight, let us help you. That evening, Lydia made a decision. She took out her mother's Bible, the one constant in all her wandering, and opened it to the pages in the back where her mother had recorded the family history. Names and dates in careful script, her grandmother's recipes, a pressed flower from her parents' wedding, and tucked in the very back, a document she'd almost forgotten about, her mother's death certificate, and beneath it, a letter. Lydia unfolded the letter with trembling hands. It was from her mother's lawyer, written just before she died, laying out the terms of the small inheritance Lydia was to receive. Not much, a few $100s and some jewelry, but evidence. Dated evidence that showed she'd had her own money, that she'd never needed to steal from anyone. More importantly, it was dated 3 months before she'd broken her engagement with Richard, before he'd started his campaign of lies. It wouldn't prove she was innocent of his specific accusations, but it might plant seeds of doubt about his narrative. She was studying the letter when Mrs. Chen appeared, letting herself in with the key Lydia had given her. You're sitting in the dark, she observed, lighting the lamp. That's never a good sign. I'm thinking. About running? Lydia looked up, surprised. How did you know? Because I've seen that look before. On my own face, in a mirror, many years ago. Mrs. Chen settled into the chair across from her. I told you I came to this country to marry a merchant who died before I arrived. What I didn't tell you is that his family accused me of causing his death, said I must have cursed him somehow, that my presence had brought bad fortune. That's horrible. It was. And for a while I ran, moved from place to place, always looking over my shoulder. But running is exhausting, Miss Hale, and it teaches the wrong lesson, that you're the one at fault, that you're the one who should hide. Mrs. Chen's eyes were sharp, knowing. Eventually, I stopped running. I came here to Redwood Creek, and I dared people to judge me. Some did, but enough didn't, and I built a life anyway. What if I can't do that? What if I'm not strong enough? You're stronger than you think. You've survived 3 years of running. Imagine what you could do if you stood still and used that strength to build instead of flee. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Besides, you have something I didn't have when I first stopped running. You have people who believe in you. Use that. Trust that. After she left, Lydia sat for a long time, the letter in her hands, Mrs. Chen's words echoing in her mind. She thought about Caleb's unwavering support, about the townspeople who had stood up for her at the wedding, about the life she'd been slowly building here in Redwood Creek, a real life, with roots and connections and purpose. Was she really going to let Richard take that away from her again? The territorial marshal arrived on a Wednesday, a lean man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. His name was Wade Bennett, and he set up shop in the sheriff's office to conduct his investigation. Lydia was called in first thing Thursday morning. She dressed carefully in her best dress, not the new blue one, but the gray one she'd been wearing when she arrived. She wanted to look like what she was, a working woman, honest and humble, with nothing to hide. Caleb walked with her to the office, his presence steadying her nerves. Just tell the truth, he said before she went in. That's all you need to do. Marshal Bennett was seated behind Caleb's desk, papers spread before him. Richard sat to one side, looking every inch the wrong gentleman in his fine suit and carefully groomed appearance. He smiled at Lydia as she entered, and the expression made her skin crawl. Miss Hale, please sit. Bennett gestured to the chair across from him. I'm here to investigate Mr. Thornton's claim that you stole $500 from him approximately 3 years ago in Philadelphia. He says you were engaged at the time and had access to his personal funds. Is this true? We were engaged, Lydia said, keeping her voice steady. But I never had access to his funds, and I never stole anything from him. She's lying, Richard said smoothly. as she's been lying for 3 years. The theft is what precipitated the end of our engagement. I was willing to overlook it if she returned the money and sought help for her difficulties. But she ran instead. Mr. Thornton, please let Miss Hale speak. Bennett turned back to Lydia. Why did the engagement end? Lydia took a breath, feeling Richard's eyes on her, feeling the weight of this moment. Everything depended on her being believed. I ended the engagement because Mr. Thornton was controlling and, at times, frightening. He wanted to dictate every aspect of my life, what I wore, who I saw, what I said. When I tried to assert any independence, he became angry. The final incident occurred when he struck me for declining to attend a political dinner with him. That's a vicious lie. Richard was on his feet, his face flushed. Marshall, you can see what I've been dealing with. She makes wild accusations, invents scenarios. Sit down, Mr. Thornton. Bennett's voice cracked like a whip. He turned back to Lydia. Do you have any evidence of this alleged violence? No. It happened in his home with no witnesses, which is why he felt free to do it. Lydia reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter from her mother's lawyer. But I do have this. It's dated 3 months before the engagement ended. It shows I inherited money from my mother, not a fortune, but enough that I had no need to steal from anyone. Bennett examined the letter carefully, then made some notes. Mr. Thornton, you claim Miss Hale stole $500. Do you have documentation of this theft? Bank records showing a withdrawal, perhaps? I keep significant cash on hand, Richard said stiffly. I noticed it missing shortly after she left. So, no documentation, just your word that the money existed and that she took it. My word should be sufficient. My family's reputation, your family's reputation doesn't constitute evidence, sir. Bennett leaned back in his chair. Miss Hale, where did you go after leaving Philadelphia? St. Louis first. I worked as a seamstress there for 8 months before moving to Denver, then Virginia City, then here. And did you, at any point, live extravagantly? Spend money in ways that would be consistent with having stolen $500? No, I worked for every penny I had. I lived in boarding houses and saved what little I could. I can provide names of my employers, references. That won't be necessary at this point. Bennett shuffled his papers. I'll need to speak with some other people in town. Get a sense of your character and habits since you've been here. This interview is concluded for now. Outside, Lydia felt her legs shake with relief. Caleb was there immediately, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. You did well. He doesn't believe me. He doesn't believe Thornton either. I could see it in his face. A man making accusations of theft with no documentation, no evidence, just his word? That doesn't hold up. Caleb guided her away from the office. Come on, let's get you home. They were halfway down the street when Richard appeared, blocking their path. His charming facade had crumbled, revealing the rage beneath. You think you've won? He hissed, his voice low enough that only they could hear. You think your little frontier sheriff can protect you? I'll destroy him too. I'll destroy this entire pathetic town if that's what it takes. Threatening a law officer is a crime, Mr. Thornton, Caleb said calmly. I suggest you step aside. Or what? You'll arrest me? On whose authority? I have friends in the territorial government. One word from me. Go ahead. Make that word. Caleb moved closer, his presence somehow larger, more dangerous. Call in your favors. Use your connections. But understand this. You're not in Philadelphia anymore. Out here, a man's word is worth more than his bank account. And you've shown yourself to be a liar and a bully. That doesn't play well in mining towns. We'll see about that. Richard's eyes slid to Lydia, and she saw something vicious in them. You could still end this, Lydia. Come back with me. Apologize. We'll say it was all a misunderstanding, and you can resume your proper place in society. My proper place, Lydia said, finding her voice, is here, in Redwood Creek, with people who see me as a person, not a possession. I'm not coming back with you, Richard. Not now, not ever. And you need to accept that. Accept it? Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't accept anything I haven't chosen to accept. You're mine, Lydia. You've always been mine. And I will have you back one way or another. He stalked away, leaving Lydia shaking with anger and fear. Caleb pulled her into the shelter of a nearby alcove, his hands on her shoulders. "He's dangerous," she whispered. "More dangerous than I realized. He's not going to stop, Caleb. Even if the marshal dismisses the charges, he'll find another way. He always finds another way." "Then we'll be ready for it." Caleb's voice was firm. "But Lydia, you need to understand something. You're not the frightened girl in Philadelphia anymore. You're stronger now. You have allies, and you have the right to defend yourself and the life you've built." "How? How do I defend myself against someone with his resources, his connections?" "By doing exactly what you did in there, by telling the truth and refusing to back down." Caleb cupped her face gently, making her look at him. "You stood in that office and faced him. You didn't flinch. You didn't apologize. You claimed your truth. That's how you win, Lydia. Not by matching his money or his connections, but by being so obviously honest that people have no choice but to believe you." Over the next 2 days, Marshal Bennett interviewed half the town. Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Sullivan, even Tucker, all of them spoke to Lydia's character and work ethic. Caleb provided a formal statement about Richard's behavior since arriving in town. And slowly, the truth began to emerge. On Saturday, Bennett called them both back to the office. Richard was already there, looking confident. But something in the marshal's expression made Lydia's heart lift with hope. "I've completed my investigation," Bennett said without preamble. "Mr. Thornton, your accusation of theft is unsupported by any evidence whatsoever. No documentation, no witnesses, just your word against Miss Hale's. Meanwhile, Miss Hale has provided evidence of her own financial means and has multiple witnesses attesting to her honest character. But, furthermore," Bennett continued, his voice hardening, "your behavior since arriving in Redwood Creek has been troubling. Multiple witnesses report you making threats against Miss Hale and Sheriff Rowan. You've attempted to use your family connections to intimidate local law enforcement, and your own statements contain inconsistencies that raise serious questions about your credibility." Richard's face had gone white, then red. "This is outrageous. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Thornton. You're a man who's used to getting his way through money and influence. But that doesn't work here. My recommendation to the territorial office will be that these charges be dismissed for lack of evidence." Bennett stood, signaling the interview was over. "And I strongly suggest you return to Philadelphia before you find yourself facing charges of harassment and false reporting." "You can't do this." "I just did. Sheriff Rowan will escort you to the stage station. You have 2 hours to be out of Redwood Creek." The look Richard shot Lydia as Caleb led him from the office was pure venom. But beneath the hate, she saw something else. Fear. Richard Thornton was afraid because for the first time in his privileged life, he'd encountered something his money and connections couldn't buy or bully. He'd encountered the truth, and it had defeated him. After they left, Bennett turned to Lydia with something approaching respect in his eyes. "That was a brave thing you did, Miss Hale. Standing up to a man like that? Most people wouldn't have had the courage." "I didn't have much choice," Lydia said. "Running wasn't working anymore." "Well, you're free to stop running now. As far as the territorial office is concerned, there's no case here. Never was." He gathered his papers. "And Miss Hale? If Thornton bothers you again, don't hesitate to contact the marshal's office directly. Men like him need to understand that the law applies to them, too." After he left, Lydia stood alone in the office, letting the reality of it sink in. It was over. Really, truly over. Richard had tried his worst, used all his tools of manipulation and intimidation, and he'd lost. She'd stood her ground, and she'd won. The door opened, and Caleb entered, his expression carefully neutral. "He's on the stage. I watched it leave town myself." "Is it really over?" "The investigation is. Whether Thornton gives up for good." Caleb moved closer, his eyes searching her face. "I can't promise you that, Lydia. I can't promise he won't try something else down the road. But I can promise that if he does, you won't face it alone." Lydia felt tears slip down her cheeks. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something that felt dangerously close to joy. "I stood up to him. I actually stood up to him and won. You did more than that. You showed this entire town what real courage looks like." Caleb reached out and wiped away her tears with gentle fingers. You showed me. I couldn't have done it without you, without everyone here. Maybe, but you're the one who chose to stay and fight instead of running. That was your choice, your courage. He paused, seeming to gather himself. And now that this is over, now that you're free of him, I need to ask you something. Lydia's heart began to beat faster. What? I meant what I said before, about being drawn to you from the moment I saw you, about you being exactly who I've been searching for. His hands were gentle on her arms, his gray eyes intense. And I need to know if there's any chance you might feel the same way. Because if there is, if there's even the smallest possibility, I want to court you properly. Not as the sheriff protecting a resident of his town, but as a man who's falling in love with a woman who's braver than she knows. The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and full of promise. And Lydia realized that for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next disaster, guarding her heart against inevitable pain. She was simply standing in the light with a man who saw all of her, the scars and the strength, the fear and the courage, and wanted her anyway. Yes, she whispered. Yes, there's more than a possibility, Caleb. There's a certainty. Because I'm falling in love with you too. His smile was like sunrise, transforming his stern features into something beautiful. And when he kissed her, gentle and reverent, Lydia felt something inside her finally fully heal. She was home. Not just in Redwood Creek, but in this moment, with this man, in this life she'd been brave enough to claim. When they finally broke apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. So, is that a yes to courting? It's a yes to everything, Lydia said, laughing through her tears. To courting, to staying, to building a life here, to all of it. Outside, the town of Redwood Creek went about its business, unaware that in the sheriff's office, 2 broken people had just found a way to be whole. The weeks following Richard's departure felt surreal to Lydia, as if she'd stepped through some invisible barrier into a life she'd only dreamed about. She woke each morning half expecting to find it all gone, revealed as some elaborate fantasy. But each morning, the sun still rose over the mountains, the town still stirred to life below her window, and Caleb still appeared with coffee and a smile that made her heart skip. The courting began slowly, carefully, both of them mindful of their pasts and the fragility of trust. Caleb would stop by the shop in the evenings after his rounds, and they would sit together as the light faded, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood on a failing farm in Missouri, about the anger that had driven him to crime, about the 3 years in prison that had broken him down before building him back up into someone new. She told him about her mother's death, about the loneliness that had made Richard's attention seem like salvation, about the slow realization that she'd traded one kind of isolation for another, more dangerous kind. I think I was so desperate to belong somewhere that I didn't see what he really was, Lydia said one evening, her needle moving rhythmically through fabric as Caleb watched from the chair by the window. Or maybe I did see it and told myself I could change him, make him better. You can't change people who don't want to change, Caleb replied quietly. I learned that the hard way. The men I rode with, they chose that life, chose the violence and the theft. No amount of friendship or loyalty was going to make them want something different. Is that why you took the chance Tom Brennan offered you? Because you wanted something different? I wanted to stop hating myself. Caleb's voice was raw with honesty. Every morning in prison, I'd wake up and think about the stagecoach driver whose face I still remember. He was terrified, and I was the one terrifying him. I was the monster in someone's story, and I couldn't live with that anymore. Lydia set down her sewing and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. You're not that person anymore. Neither are you. You're not the woman who let Richard Thornton define her worth. He squeezed her hand gently. We get to be new people now. Together. The town watched their courtship with interest, but surprisingly, without much judgment. Mrs. Chen observed it all with satisfaction, as if she'd orchestrated the entire thing. Mrs. Patterson organized a social specifically so Lydia and Caleb could attend together as an acknowledged couple. Even Mrs. Whitmore, never one to miss an opportunity for commentary, merely remarked that they seemed well-suited and left it at that. But not everyone was pleased. There were still whispers, still people who thought Lydia wasn't good enough for their sheriff, or that Caleb was foolish to tie himself to a woman with such a questionable past. Tucker, in one of his sober moments, warned Caleb that Thornton might return with reinforcements. "Men like that don't forget being humiliated," Tucker said, his voice heavy with the wisdom of someone who'd made plenty of mistakes himself. "And they don't forgive. You watch yourself, Sheriff. And watch Miss Hale, too." Caleb took the warning seriously, though he didn't share it with Lydia immediately. He didn't want to poison their happiness with fear of something that might never happen. But he remained vigilant, keeping an eye on strangers who came through town, checking with the stage office about passengers arriving from the east. 2 months after Richard's departure, as summer settled over Redwood Creek with its dry heat and long golden evenings, Caleb invited Lydia to visit his ranch. She'd known abstractly that he owned property outside of town, that his position as sheriff was only part-time, and his real income came from cattle. But she'd never seen the place, never understood what it meant to him. The ride out took nearly an hour, following a trail that wound through pine forests and across meadows thick with wildflowers. When they finally crested a rise and Caleb pointed down into the valley below, Lydia caught her breath. The ranch house was modest but sturdy, built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that looked out over grazing land that stretched toward the mountains. A barn stood nearby, recently painted, and she could see cattle dotting the hillsides in the distance. "It's not much," Caleb said, suddenly uncertain in a way she rarely saw him. "But it's mine. Bought it with wages saved from 5 years of working for Tom, plus what I made as sheriff. Every board and nail paid for, honestly." "It's beautiful," Lydia said and meant it. She could see the pride in every careful repair, the hope in every improvement. This wasn't just property, it was redemption made solid. They dismounted and Caleb led her inside. The interior was sparse but clean, with furniture that was clearly handmade and a fireplace that dominated one wall. There were books on a shelf, more than she would have expected, and a desk in the corner with papers neatly stacked. Everything spoke of a man who'd built a life with careful intention, who'd chosen every element deliberately. "I keep meaning to make it more comfortable," Caleb said, looking around as if seeing it through her eyes. "But I'm not here much except to sleep and do the books. Most of my time is in town or out checking the herd." Lydia moved to the window, looking out at the view. She could imagine herself here, could picture curtains on the windows and rugs on the floor, could see a life unfolding in these rooms. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked quietly. Caleb came to stand beside her, his shoulder just touching hers. "Because I wanted you to see it. To understand what I'm offering when I say I want a future with you. It's not Philadelphia society or fancy parties or any of the things you might have had. It's just this, a ranch, a town, a simple life. But it's honest, and it's yours if you want it." Lydia turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You're asking me to marry you?" "Not yet. Not officially." Caleb's hands were gentle on her arms. "But yes, that's what I'm working toward. I want to do this right, Lydia. Want to give you time to be sure, to know that you're choosing me and this life because you want it, not because you're running from something else or because you feel obligated." "How much time do you think I need?" "As much as you want. A year, 2 years, whatever it takes for you to be certain." He paused, his gray eyes intense. "But I need you to know I'm already certain. I was certain the moment you told me yes in the sheriff's office. I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I don't need years, Caleb. I don't even need months. I need time to finish Mrs. Harrison's commission and time to tell Mrs. Chen I'll be leaving the shop. But after that..." She took a breath, making the leap. "After that, I want to be your wife. I want to build a life here with you. I want to belong somewhere, finally, truly belong." The joy that transformed his face was worth every moment of fear and doubt she'd endured. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. And when he kissed her this time, there was no hesitation, no holding back. There was only promise and passion and the fierce certainty that they'd found something worth fighting for. "The Harvest Festival is in 6 weeks, Caleb said when they finally broke apart, both of them slightly breathless. "It's the biggest event of the year. Everyone in town and half the surrounding ranches come. Would you stand with me there? Let me court you publicly, officially, so everyone knows my intentions?" "Yes," Lydia said simply. "To all of it, yes." The 6 weeks that followed were the happiest of Lydia's life. She threw herself into her work with renewed energy, finishing commissions with care and artistry that had people talking throughout the territory. Word spread about the talented seamstress in Redwood Creek, and she received inquiries from as far away as Sacramento. Mrs. Chen, rather than being upset about Lydia's impending departure from the shop, seemed delighted. "I knew from the beginning you wouldn't stay forever," she said pragmatically. "You're too skilled, too ambitious. But I thought you'd leave for a city, for bigger opportunities. Instead, you're staying here, becoming part of this community. That's better than I hoped." "I couldn't have stayed without you," Lydia said honestly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You taught me that I didn't need to apologize for existing." "I taught you nothing. You learned it yourself. I just provided the space for the learning to happen." Mrs. Chen smiled, one of her rare, genuine smiles. "And now you'll provide that space for others. That's how it works, Miss Hale. We lift each other up." As the Harvest Festival approached, Lydia worked on a special project, a dress for herself, the first truly beautiful thing she'd made for her own use in 3 years. She used the blue fabric Mrs. Chen had given her, but she added lace she'd purchased with her own saved money and embroidery she worked late into the night. Every stitch was a declaration, a claim on her own life and her own worth. The morning of the festival dawned clear and bright, with a crispness in the air that promised autumn wasn't far behind. The entire town had transformed, with booths and tables set up along the main street, bunting strung between buildings, and the smell of food cooking filling the air. There would be competitions for best preserves, best baked goods, best needlework. There would be music and dancing, and there would be an auction where craftspeople and artists could sell their wares to benefit the school. Lydia dressed carefully in her new blue dress, pinning up her hair with combs she'd bought from the general store. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Gone was the hunted, fearful look. Gone was the apologetic hunch of her shoulders. The woman in the mirror stood tall and proud, ready to step into the light. Caleb arrived to collect her, and the expression on his face when he saw her made all the hours of sewing worthwhile. "You're stunning," he said simply. "The most beautiful woman I've ever seen." They walked to the festival together, her hand tucked into his arm, and this time Lydia didn't flinch from the attention. She met people's eyes and smiled, exchanged greetings, accepted compliments on her dress. This was her town now. These were her people, and she had every right to be here. The day passed in a whirl of activity. Lydia's needlework entry, a sampler she'd worked on in her spare moments, won second place, which thrilled her more than first place would have because it meant she'd been judged on merit, not sympathy. She watched Caleb compete in a sharpshooting contest and felt absurd pride when he won. They ate roasted corn and berry pie, and Lydia found herself laughing more than she had in years. As evening approached and lanterns were lit against the gathering dusk, the auction began. Local craftspeople brought their items forward one by one, and the auctioneer, Mr. Sullivan, who apparently had experience from his ranching days, called out bids with theatrical flair. A quilt went for $15, a carved wooden box brought in $12, a set of horseshoes commanded $8. Then Mrs. Chen appeared, carrying something wrapped in cloth. She climbed onto the platform and unveiled it with a flourish. The wedding dress Lydia had made for Sarah Harrison, but this wasn't the original. This was a miniature version, perfectly constructed in every detail, mounted in a frame. "Miss Lydia Hale created this piece," Mrs. Chen announced. "Some of you saw the original at the Harrison wedding. This is a testament to her skill, her artistry, and her dedication to her craft. All proceeds from the sale will go to the school fund." The bidding started at $5. It quickly rose to 10, then 15. Lydia watched in amazement as people she barely knew competed for her work. $20, $25. The numbers kept climbing. Then a voice from the back cut through the growing murmur. $50. The crowd parted to reveal Richard Thornton. The festival seemed to freeze. Lydia felt ice water flood her veins. He was supposed to be gone, supposed to have accepted defeat. But here he was, dressed impeccably as always, his smile sharp as a knife. Mr. Thornton, Caleb's voice was dangerous as he moved to stand between Richard and the platform. You were ordered to leave Redwood Creek. I was ordered to leave Redwood Creek within 2 hours. I did. But there's no law saying I can't return. Richard's eyes found Lydia in the crowd. And when I heard about this charming festival, how could I resist? Especially when there's a chance to support local talent. Your bid is rejected, Mrs. Chen said flatly from the platform. We don't want your money. That's not how auctions work, madam. I made a legitimate bid. Richard pulled out a wallet thick with bills. Unless you'd like to refuse money meant for the school, I'm sure the children's parents would be very interested to hear that. The trap was elegant. If they rejected his bid, he could claim they were letting personal animosity harm the children. If they accepted it, he'd have inserted himself back into the community, proven that his money could buy anything, even acceptance. But before anyone could respond, another voice rang out. $100. Every head turned. Caleb had climbed onto the platform, standing beside Mrs. Chen, his face set with determination. $100 for Miss Hale's work, and I'll double it, $200 total to the school fund, if Mr. Thornton withdraws his bid and leaves Redwood Creek, tonight, permanently. The crowd erupted in whispers. $200 was a fortune, more than most families made in half a year. Richard's face had gone pale, then red. You can't possibly have that kind of money, he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. I've been saving for 5 years. Every penny I didn't need for basic expenses, I saved. Was planning to use it to expand the ranch, maybe buy more cattle. Caleb's eyes met Lydia's across the crowd. But there's nothing more important than protecting what matters most. And Lydia matters most. Lydia felt tears streaming down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was being chosen. Publicly, decisively, at great personal cost, she was being chosen. Furthermore, Caleb continued, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, I'm formally asking Lydia Hale to be my wife. Right here, right now, in front of everyone. Because I want there to be no doubt, no question about where she belongs. She belongs with me. She belongs in Redwood Creek. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then from somewhere in the crowd, someone started clapping. Mrs. Patterson, her hands making sharp reports in the quiet. Others joined in. Mrs. Chen, Mr. Sullivan, young Lily, and her mother. Even Mrs. Whitmore, grudgingly but genuinely. The applause built and built until it was thunderous, until it was clear that Redwood Creek had made its choice. Richard stood there, surrounded by the sound of his defeat, and for the first time since Lydia had known him, he looked small, diminished. The power he'd held over her for 3 years evaporated in the face of an entire community standing against him. Keep your money, he said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Keep your pathetic town and your frontier justice. But mark my words, no. Lydia stepped forward, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. No more threats, no more warnings, no more attempts to control my life. You lost, Richard. Not because Caleb has more money or because this town is protecting me, but because I stopped being afraid of you. You have no power over me anymore. You never did, really. I just took a while to understand that. She walked toward the platform, the crowd parting to let her through. When she reached Caleb, she took his outstretched hand and climbed up beside him. From here, she could see the entire festival spread out before her, all these people who had slowly, gradually learned to accept her, who had chosen her just as she had chosen them. Yes, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I'll marry you, Caleb Rowan. I'll build a life with you and be part of this community and stop running from shadows that have no substance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Somewhere, a fiddle started playing, and below them, Richard Thornton turned and walked away, finally, truly defeated. Not by money or violence or legal maneuvering, but by the simple, powerful truth that Lydia had found something he could never take from her, a home. The wedding happened 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the same church where Sarah Harrison had married. Lydia wore her blue dress and carried wildflowers that Lily had gathered from the meadows. Mrs. Chen stood as her witness, and Caleb's deputy stood as his. Half the town crowded into the small church, and the other half waited outside to throw rice and wish them well. The vows were simple, traditional, but when Lydia spoke them, she meant them with every fiber of her being, to have and to hold, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. These weren't empty promises. They were a commitment to build something lasting, something real. When the ceremony ended and they walked out into the afternoon sunshine, Lydia felt something settle inside her. This was peace. This was home. This was the life she'd been searching for through all those lonely years of running. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch. Their ranch now, though Lydia was still getting used to thinking of it that way. Someone had decorated the porch with more wildflowers and ribbons. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food that the townspeople had brought, and as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, people danced and laughed and celebrated not just a wedding, but a victory. The victory of truth over lies, of community over isolation, of love over fear. Mrs. Chen pulled Lydia aside at one point, pressing a small package into her hands. For you, for your new life. Inside was a beautiful set of embroidered pillowcases. The work so fine it must have taken months. Mrs. Chen, these are exquisite. They're practical. You need nice things in your home. Mrs. Chen's voice was gruff, but her eyes were soft. You've earned them, Miss Hale, or should I say Mrs. Rowan. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Yes, you could have. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as easily, but you would have found your way eventually. You're stronger than you think. Mrs. Chen squeezed her hand. But I'm glad I could help, and I'm glad you're staying. Redwood Creek is better with you in it. As the evening wore on and guests gradually departed, Lydia found herself standing on the porch with Caleb, watching the last of the sunset fade into twilight. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the deepening sky, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Are you happy? Caleb asked quietly, his arm around her waist. I'm more than happy. I'm home. Lydia leaned into him, feeling safe and certain in a way she'd never felt before. Do you remember what I said that night after the social? Chang I tong won emka. No one has ever wanted me. I remember. I was wrong. Not that no one wanted me. That part was true enough. But I was wrong to think that meant something was wrong with me. The problem wasn't that I was unwantable. The problem was that I was looking for acceptance in the wrong places, from the wrong people. Caleb turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. And now? Now I've been chosen. By you, by this town, by this life. And more importantly, I've chosen back. I've chosen to stop running, to stop hiding, to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world. Lydia reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw beneath her fingers. You said you'd been looking for me all your life, but I think maybe I was looking for you too. I just didn't know it until I found you. They stood there as full darkness fell, two people who'd been broken by their pasts, but had found a way to be whole together. The ranch house behind them glowed with lamplight, a beacon of home and safety, and in the distance the lights of Redwood Creek twinkled like earthbound stars. The months that followed were not without challenges. The ranch required constant work, and learning to manage a household while continuing her sewing business stretched Lydia's capabilities. There were days when exhaustion left her in tears, days when she questioned whether she was cut out for this life. But Caleb was always there, steady and patient, helping with the heavy work and encouraging her to ask for help when she needed it. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow and forcing them to spend long evenings by the fire. Lydia used the time to teach Caleb to read better. His education had been spotty, and he was embarrassed by his limitations. In turn, he taught her about ranching, about reading weather signs and animal behavior, about all the practical knowledge that kept the ranch running. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's fears, each other's dreams, and slowly, carefully, they built something that looked like forever. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle calved successfully, and Caleb's investment of time and careful breeding showed in the healthy stock. Lydia's sewing business had grown to the point where she could be selective about commissions, taking only the work that genuinely interested her. And in April, she discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She'd always wanted children, but had convinced herself during the running years that it would never happen, that she was too damaged, too unsettled to bring a child into the world. But here, in the safety of the ranch, with Caleb's hand gentle on her still flat stomach, she let herself believe it might actually work. "We're going to be parents," Caleb said, wonder in his voice. "Are you scared?" Lydia asked. Terrified, but also excited. He pulled her close. "We're going to do better than our parents did. We're going to give this child everything we didn't have: safety, stability, unconditional love. And a community," Lydia added, thinking of Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Patterson and all the others who had slowly become her family. "They'll have so many people looking out for them." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through summer. Lydia worked until her growing belly made sitting at the sewing machine uncomfortable, then transitioned to hand sewing and design work. The townspeople rallied around her. Mrs. Patterson organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets. Mrs. Chen appeared with tiny garments she'd sewn, and even Mrs. Whitmore contributed a beautiful christening gown that had been in her family for generations. "Every child deserves to be welcomed properly," Mrs. Whitmore said, her usual severity softening. "Even frontier children." In October, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Lydia gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when she was certain she wouldn't survive. But Mrs. Patterson, who had assisted at dozens of births, stayed with her throughout, her calm presence a lifeline. And when it was finally over, when the baby was placed in her arms, Lydia understood for the first time what it meant to love something more than your own life. "She's perfect," Caleb whispered, his rough fingers impossibly gentle as he touched their daughter's tiny hand. "What should we name her?" Lydia had thought about this for months, had considered names from her mother's Vietnamese heritage and Caleb's American roots. But as she looked down at the small, perfect face, she knew there was only one name that fit. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope, because that's what she represents, the future we were brave enough to build." The years that followed brought their share of trials. There were hard winters when the cattle struggled. There were seasons when Lydia's business was slow and money was tight. There were the normal difficulties of any marriage, the small frictions and larger disagreements that had to be worked through with patience and love. But there were also joys beyond measure. Hope's first steps, taken on the porch of the ranch house with the mountains as a backdrop. The expansion of the ranch as Caleb's hard work and careful management paid off. The deepening of friendships with the townspeople who had become family. And slowly, gradually, the fading of old fears until they were just memories, painful but no longer defining. On Hope's 5th birthday, as they celebrated with a party that brought half of Redwood Creek to the ranch, Lydia found herself standing on the porch again, watching the festivities. Mrs. Chen was teaching Hope to embroider, her patience surprising for someone usually so brusque. Caleb was talking cattle with Mr. Sullivan, their heads bent over some problem they were solving together. Children ran shrieking through the yard, and adults laughed and shared food and stories. This was her life now. Not the life she'd imagined as a young woman in Philadelphia, dreaming of balls and society, but something better, something real and earned and wholly her own. "Mama!" Hope ran up, her small face flushed with excitement. "Mrs. Chen says when I'm bigger, I can learn to use the sewing machine like you." Lydia knelt down to her daughter's level, smoothing back dark hair that was so like her own. "Would you like that?" "Yes, I want to make beautiful things like you do." Hope threw her arms around Lydia's neck. "And I want to be brave like you. Mrs. Patterson told me you were very brave when you first came here." "Did she?" Lydia glanced over at Mrs. Patterson, who smiled and shrugged. "She said you were scared, but you stayed anyway. And that's what being brave means. Being scared, but doing the hard thing anyway." Hope pulled back to look at her mother seriously. "Were you really scared, Mama?" "I was terrified," Lydia admitted. "But your papa helped me be brave, and the people of this town helped. And eventually, I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I want to be strong like you, too." Lydia pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid weight of her in her arms. This child would never know what it was like to run, to hide, to apologize for existing. This child would grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, loved without condition. And that knowledge alone made every struggle, every fear, every moment of pain worthwhile. You will be, sweetheart. You'll be exactly who you're meant to be. And your papa and I will love you every step of the way. As the sun set over the mountains that evening, painting the sky in those familiar shades of pink and gold, Caleb found Lydia standing alone on the porch, watching the last of the light fade. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, slipping his arm around her waist. "I was thinking about the day I arrived in Redwood Creek," Lydia said. "How certain I was that I'd be driven out within weeks. How convinced I was that nowhere would ever be home. And now? Now I know that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, with work and patience and the courage to stay even when staying is hard." She turned to look at him, this man who had seen all her brokenness and loved her anyway. "You told me once that you'd been looking for me all your life. On da timem sut kakuk doimin. I remember, though I still don't know what that means." Lydia smiled. "It means exactly what you think it means, that you were searching for me, even when you didn't know I existed. And I was searching for you too, even when I thought I was just running away." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his jaw. "We found each other, Caleb. Two broken people who found a way to be whole. Not just whole," Caleb said softly, "happy. Truly, completely happy." Inside the house, they could hear Hope chattering to Mrs. Chen, her young voice bright with excitement. The sound was like music, like a promise of all the years stretching ahead, years of growth and change and challenges met together, years of building a life that mattered, that had meaning beyond mere survival. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Staying here instead of going to a city where your talent could have made you famous, where you could have had comfort and recognition?" "Never," Lydia said with absolute certainty. "Fame and recognition are hollow without people who truly know you, who love you for who you are rather than what you can do for them. I have everything I need right here. You, Hope, this community, this life we've built together. I wouldn't trade it for anything." They stood there as darkness fell completely and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky. The ranch house behind them glowed with lamplight and echoed with the sounds of family and friends finishing their celebration. And in that moment, Lydia understood with perfect clarity that she had finally truly arrived. Not at a destination, because life was never that simple, but at a place of peace, of belonging, of being fully and completely herself, without apology or fear. She had been the woman no one wanted, the woman who ran from town to town carrying shame that wasn't hers to carry. But she had become something else, a wife, a mother, a valued member of a community, a woman who knew her own worth and refused to negotiate it. And standing there on the porch with Caleb's arm around her and their daughter's laughter carrying through the open door, Lydia finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not by circumstance or desperation or lack of options, but by deliberate, conscious, unconditional love. She had been running for so long, convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people, in other places, in other lives. But happiness, she had learned, wasn't something you found at the end of a journey. It was something you created day by day, choice by choice, through the simple act of showing up for your own life and daring to believe you deserved good things. "I love you," she said to Caleb, the words still feeling new and precious even after years of marriage. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for waiting while I learned to trust. Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly wanted." "I love you too," Caleb replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And Lydia, you don't need to thank me. Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done. You're exactly who I've been searching for all my life. You always were." The words echoed in the quiet night, a benediction and a promise. And as they turned to go inside to rejoin their daughter and their friends, to step back into the warm glow of their home, Lydia carried with her the knowledge that she had finally, completely, irrevocably found her place in the world. She was no longer the woman no one wanted. She was Lydia Rowan, wife and mother and valued member of Redwood Creek. She was a survivor who had become a thriver. She was a woman who had learned to stand in the light instead of hiding in shadows. And she was at long last home,